All right, my friends, I am really excited to welcome Dr. Jeff Simone to the Sober Stories podcast. Jeff, thanks for being here today.
No problem at all. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, give our listeners a little bit of a summary of you, kind of the high notes, the cliff notes, where you are, what you do, who is in your life, all of the relevant information before we dig into the juicy stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Jeff Simone. I'm a doctor of pharmacy and a certified dietary supplement advisor by formal training. Most importantly, I'm a person in long-term recovery from opioid and amphetamine addiction, among other things. After many years of trying, many years of trying, I've been fully abstinent since 2016. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I love talking about this stuff. I could sit here and talk all day. And this is what fills me up. Talking to people, working with people. This is it for me. In terms of what I'm doing now, I have a kind of few different little ventures going on. I have a coaching practice with reaction recovery. That's really where I like to focus a lot of my passion, I guess. I work with clients all over the world. It's an absolute pleasure and it's a privilege to be able to do what I do on a day-to-day basis. Because if you interviewed me 10 years ago, like I was working on the pharmacy bench. I was in the throes of a life-threatening addiction. If you would have taken a video of me today, for example, in the last 24 hours or so, last 72 hours, and you would have showed me that this is where this is all going to go. I live in the greater Philadelphia area. We moved here. I was out practicing in Southern California for about 6 years. We moved out here. We started a family. I have a 6-year-old boy and a 4-year-old girl, and I'm living in the suburbs with my wife. And it's a completely different life, and it's one that truly is beyond my wildest dreams. If you want to take some of the program speak. So yep.
Yeah, I was thinking, sorry, my dog is walking around through some magnet tiles. So I was thinking your kids were similar in age to mine. I've got a 3 and a 6-year-old. So right beyond my view is just a wreck of Hot Wheels and magnet tiles that my dog just tripped through. So, and I think that that's interesting that you say, like, 10 years ago, if you had taken a snapshot of me and then said that this is what I'd be doing now, it's just truly unfathomable. And I think that a lot of people in recovery, and especially people who have found some sort of work or volunteer or passion or career out of recovery, it's like, this is never something I ever could have dreamed up. But at the same time, it's like, I would have never dreamed up my addiction either.
That's
so
right.
Tell us a little bit more about your story. I know in this space, we often talk about alcohol, but I know that opioids and methamphetamines are part of your story. So can you tell us kind of what that looked like and how, I know you've said that you're abstinent from everything at this point, what that all has looked like and the progression of that for you?
Yeah. And also just even like the abstinent thing, I throw that in there usually kind of right out of the outset because the way that I talk about this stuff, it is a lot different than even the way that I talked about it, maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago. Just even, I was brought into recovery. I use the word indoctrinated. That was my first sort of, I use it, and I use that in a positive light. Right. I don't say that necessarily like I was brainwashed, right?
Right.
I was indoctrinated, kind of via that kind of 12-step mentality. And a lot of it is very, it is very abstinence based. And sometimes it comes across maybe, or at least this is the message that I was receiving, that it's a little bit hostile towards, alternate paths. Okay. So the way that I see everything is completely different. So I make it a point to say that although my path is the full abstinence path, and I kind of say that right out of the outset, everything else that I usually say about this, and when I'm talking to people, that is certainly not the model that has to get force fed. In fact, it cannot be force fed, right? It is like sort of by definition, it's that you cannot do that. And anybody who is, the stages of change model has kind of dominated our field for a very long period of time, right? So kind of anybody who subscribes to any of that kind of stuff, and of course that's That's not just addiction, right?
Right.
It's not just behavioral health. It is anybody who's trying to make a change in any type of change. You can only really kind of move in a certain direction. Okay, so if somebody is in that if you want to call it pre-contemplative, right? They're maybe I have a problem. I don't really. I think I'm going to try to work on my drinking, and I'll figure it out soon. I think if you expect that person is going to go from there to okay, make 2 meetings a day, get your hand up, say you're an alcoholic, start doing this stuff. It's not going to happen in that kind of stage 1 to stage 5 kind of progression. So
Right.
so that's where I see things a little bit differently than I used to. I my bottom tended to be a little maybe more severe than the average person. Okay, so I think that it was easier for me to accept some of this. And we talk about rock bottom sometimes, and that's even a controversial topic in terms of where are you waiting for somebody to hit rock bottom versus when are you going to get them?
Yeah.
Right. And I think fentanyl has really changed that conversation too. So I think that without the onslaught of fentanyl, which I'm going to call it 2015, fentanyl, of course, was being used before that. I had used fentanyl, years before, but not in the sense of the poisoning I'm talking about. It is different. Somebody using fentanyl lollipops or lozenges or transdermal patches, even injectable, right? Somebody like in a hospital setting who might have gotten their hands on some of those more potent opioids, completely different than the poisonings that have happened from 2015 up until now. So I think that whereas in the past maybe we had time, right? There was a period of time between when it looks to me like you've hit rock bottom. Okay, so me as an outside observer, until you actually feel that you do, and then you're ready to start taking some actions to get better. There is a period of time there. Nowadays, it's like that gap has become almost like non-existent, right? It's like you're just dead. You get the wrong batch on the wrong day, and that's it. Game over. Like there's no and then the whole line about you can't like recover dead people, essentially. Okay, so it's kind of like at what point can we start making some changes in any. So now I am under the mindset of any positive change, any positive change. So everything that comes about now, I am not only am I not antagonistic towards it, but I am supportive of it. Right. So, we could talk safe injection sites. We can talk all types of things. Of course, clean needle programs. I feel that a lot of people are kind of on board with that one. Right. But there are a lot of other, things where people might say this is enabling. Okay. So it's kind of like the question between what is enabling somebody and you are preventing them from kind of having the privilege of hitting bottom, so to speak. Right. Versus what is just you trying to keep this person alive long enough that they might then have that same experience that you had. So that is why I do talk about the abstinence thing right off the top, where I will just mention that from the beginning and say, this is my story, but that's not everybody's story.
So one of the things that I hear you saying that I really resonate with is the nuance and where we are starting to understand different versions of what this might look like for people as a way to open doors, as a way to get them in get a foot in the door for them before they ever have to hit rock bottom, or before there ever has to be severe consequences, or before, especially with this idea of the opioid epidemic and fentanyl and the way that it is really rapidly shifting, before there ever is severe consequences like overdose or even death. So I really resonate with that idea in my own story. And I speak similarly, say, I am like fully abstinent from alcohol. There's no version of using it that works in my life, and it would have severe consequences very, very quickly. But I think there's a lot of space for other ways of working through that model of change that you mentioned, the stages of change from pre-contemplation to contemplation to action to all of the things that we know are part of that. So you are fully abstinent now. And what has that what is kind of like, you say 10 years ago, what did that look like, and how did you get to a place where you live in suburbia, you have 2 kids, you run this recovery business? What is your story?
Yeah, and I promise that I will answer that question next. But you kind of made me think
Yeah.
of something. You made me think of something, so I might bounce around just
Beautiful.
a bit. Talking about the abstinence piece again. So I agree with you, right? So I am. That is what I have chosen for my recovery, and I believe in my heart of hearts that that is the only path for me, right? So I don't. There's nothing in my head that says, well, maybe you can do this, maybe you can do that. Now, I I think that it is a spectrum, and there and life will intervene at times, right? So I actually, had like an Instagram post not too long ago, where I was saying that if somebody is recovering from opioid addiction, there will be a point in this person's life where there is a legitimate medical reason to take opiates, okay? And then what you were going to do at that point, like nobody can say for sure, and that's the whole like to thine own self be true. Um, and my story is, 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, it was April of 2020. This is like, weeks into the pandemic. So it was just the most horrible timing. I was in a horrible car accident. And I wasn't wearing a seatbelt. My head went through the windshield, and I was, they kind of had to cut me out of the car and pull me out. It was horrible. It was a bad experience. And I needed surgery for the first time. Okay. Like not the first time in recovery, the first time. So that was a legitimate time to use opiates. Okay. So when I was first in the ER, which again, worst time ever, by the way, oh my God, it was so bad. It's like, they didn't want anybody in the hospitals, right? So like, you're just sitting in there. Like I was sitting in there for probably like an hour, I think, before somebody even, and this is not me saying like I have a little bit of a cold. This is me just coming off of like like a major, well, first they put me through the CAT scan, so I should say that. So, so they kind of, they did that little thing, and I don't really have too many memories of that part, but they did do like the initial assessment. So once they realized that I was kind of, still cognitively functioning, they brought me into this room, stable-ish, yeah, that's a good way to put it. And they put me in this room, and then like an hour later, somebody comes in, the nurse comes in and starts like administering morphine. I guess it's kind of standard, standard dose of morphine, and then they're going to reset my toe, okay, because it like slipped out of place, so they had to do that before. And I said no to it, okay. So this is how entrenched that idea of I can't use them is. Now they end up setting the toe without it. It was excruciating pain. I end up going
that
through
gives
surgery.
me a pit in my stomach thinking about it. I'm kind of
it was absolutely terrible. It was absolutely terrible. This guy, and it didn't work right away. He's just pulling it and twisting it, and then like he can't get it. Then he had to call someone because like he was the intern, I think, and then he had to call in like the actual guy.
You're like, I'm not here for the interns. Yeah, I'm not here for the interns.
Totally. I'm like, don't give me the guy who this is his first time trying to reset a toe. Give me the guy who does 50 of these a day. So then I had surgery about whatever it was, like a week later, whenever they were able to get me in. And I refused the pain medication there as well. I used kind of like high strength Motrin, a few other things, right? They're alternating that. But I refused the opiates, and it was excruciating. It was like once that nerve block wore off, it was 24 hours in, I guess, and it's like 3:00 in the morning, and I'm staring up at the ceiling, and I'm thinking like, what are you doing? What are you, like no one's walking in right now high-fiving you. This is not like 80s, Rambo, like Macho Man kind of stuff. Like what is it? That you didn't join Martyrs Anonymous. So it's like, what exactly is, so the reason that I tell that story is because that is how strong that stuff can really sit in, right? Where it becomes a little bit fuzzy, when should I ever take it? And when should I? So if that happened today, I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly what I would do. I know that it was the worst physical pain that I had been in. But I tell that story just to say, that's what I did. I'm not saying everybody should do it that way.
Yeah. And, I think that's like I find a lot of people, especially if they're in early sobriety, and there's specifically because the people I work with are in sobriety for alcohol, that does come up. Like you said, life will force you to realize that this is a time when you have to choose if this aligns with your version of sobriety and if it aligns with your version of like wellness in your body. And I think that that's a really good conversation to have because as you said, it's inevitable. It's something that people will always experience. So I hear you saying before that you were pretty staunch, entrenched in this idea of complete abstinence. So tell us the story of how all of this came to be.
I mean, I'll try to give you 15 years, in a relatively condensed fashion. There's so many great topics we could get into. Like I said, I could sit here for hours, like on this subject. For me, so I started like a little late, I guess, in everything. Like nothing really too like remarkable in childhood in terms of like big T types of things, right? It is like reflecting back now, 6 years into this process and having been doing, like a lot of work and reading a lot and talking with a lot of people and studying this type of stuff as well and experiencing it, of course, I do see that period of time differently. But in terms of those kind of major issues, no, they were not there. I started drinking, sometime in high school, and that was great. It really did for me what I couldn't do for myself. Mm-hmm. And I really had that experience of just being full, right? That, and it's, such an interesting thing. It's like, and I'll hear a lot of people talk about this before, we who are now in the recovery community, or we who go on to develop, some type of substance use disorder, before we're exposed to that thing that works, we don't know that we were missing that thing. Yep. Because how would you know, right? That's just you. That's just the way you've always felt. So yeah, you get anxious sometimes and you get, can't sleep and you don't always feel comfortable, but it's like everybody feels the same way about everything, right? So, cause it's like, how would we compare? And then I drink, and then that fills that stuff in and it was great. And then we started drinking and smoking weed and that was great. And then that went on for a little while. And then at some point somebody got a, prescription for Vicodin. And I took that, one night and my life changed forever, and my life permanently changed forever. And I believe that something changed in my brain so I was probably about 19 years old, like when I was first exposed to that. And I've never, ever since been the same, right? It is the person who was there for that first half of my life, basically, is not the same person who is here now. And it was a love moment, is what it was. Like when I've struggled for years to really try to like describe what it was, right? Because it's another one of those things where if 6 people like are in a room taking this stuff and everybody kind of looks sedated the same way, right? Or everybody kind of looks, it's like intoxication sort of looks like intoxication. You can't, it's very hard to like objectively say how somebody's feeling. Like there are ways to measure it, right? So even like with alcohol, there are ways to measure exactly what's going on cognitively, right? That somebody might be predisposed to an alcohol addiction down the line. Mm-hmm. Same kind of things with opiates, but I didn't know at the time that everybody wasn't having the same experience. But I know now that it's the feeling of love. It's that I believe that every alcohol to some extent also there are a lot of overlaps. If we're looking at the brain, there are a lot of overlaps between alcohol and opiates. That is why certain drugs like naltrexone, for example, okay, right. Like there's a reason that like naltrexone is not given for amphetamine addiction. It is not given for benzodiazepine addiction. It's not given for most process addictions, right? It can temper some of like the high from, say it's sex addiction, gambling addiction, even shopping, right? Mm-hmm. Some of that stuff can be tempered certainly by naltrexone, but it is never proven to be an effective treatment. So we don't give a shopping addicted person a Vivitrol shot, right? But it's like naltrexone can help with the alcohol, and a lot of that is endorphin mediated, right? So so for somebody to get that endorphin effect, there has to be some type of endorphin deficiency to begin with, right? Otherwise, I mean, talk to most people who take opiates.
Mhm.
Just the majority of the population has taken opiates, right? At some point in their life, you've had something. You've had a tooth surgery or
I had
something.
2 C-sections.
2 C-sections. Yeah. People take opiates at some point. They're going to be exposed to them, and they're not going to describe it the way that I'm describing it, where I'm falling in love, right? You know, they don't like feeling that kind of slurry, sedated. They don't like being constipated, right? They don't like just all the stuff that kind of comes along with opiates. People don't like that, so they don't do it. Like they'll do it if they're in physical pain, because they don't want to be in physical pain,
right?
But they're not doing it for the emotional pain. So that was me, and then that was right right as OxyContin was really taking everything by storm. Just like the classic story of, well, why are you spending $10 on one of these when you can spend $50 and get the equivalent of 8 of these, right? $50 was always a lot for one pill, but that was it, right? And why crush this stuff up into this whole gigantic mound of powder when you can crush it up into this tiny little thing? And it made sense, right?
Yeah.
They kind of sold us on that, and it sort of took off from there. I went to school. I studied biology. I studied nutrition. I was, I didn't know what I wanted to do around the age 22.
Who does?
Who does, exactly. And when I tell this story now, I will make the joke. I'll say I was very good at math and science. So all that I knew for sure was I was very good at math and science, and I loved OxyContin, and I loved Adderall. And when you put all those things in a pile, what kind of conclusion does a drug addicted 22-year-old come up with, who's pretty good at taking those kind of tests? I decided to go to pharmacy school. And I never did it, because I get asked this question all the time. I never did it with the intention of diverting medications, of just getting quick, easy access. Never. That was
just a topic of interest.
Yeah, it was just something that I liked. I liked studying it. It was easy, and I just randomly took this exam this one time, and I happened to score like really well. Then I got into the school. It's like, I think about that a lot. I mean, I probably just had a really good day of testing, because it was a really hard exam, and I feel like I shouldn't have performed quite as well as I did. If I would have not, my life might have been different. Now, I believe that it would have manifested, of course, right? But it would not have accelerated to the degree that it did, right? Where it was. I mean, to this day, I've worked with tons of people, like, all professionally, personally, like on a volunteer basis. I haven't met anybody who was consuming more in terms of overall quantity. I have not yet come in contact with somebody, and that's, I say that not because have some superhuman body that can process this stuff. That's opiates are different than the other stuff when it comes to this. Right. Tolerance can just keep going, right? And if you're not, what gets people into problems with the opiates early on, right, is that people do not have unlimited access, right? Even if they had like unlimited funds, which most people don't,
right?
Even if they were, had unlimited money, at some point their supply would run out. Their guy wouldn't call them back. Something would happen where they'd be forced into withdrawal, and that's what that whole cycle, things become unmanageable really quickly, right? But in my case, it literally went up by a factor of 80, because I used to think about like my dependence in terms of factors of 80. Like I'm doing 80 milligrams per day. Now next year, 160 milligrams per day. Next year, 240, and it went like that for for over 10 years. In my 20s, I did not draw a sober breath. Like there was not a 24-hour period from age 20 to age 29 that I drew a sober breath, and I never thought that it was going to be like that. In fact, every single birthday, like those entire 10 years, every birthday, so somebody would get me a cake or something, and there was some candles, and I would make a wish to myself, and like my wish would be that next year when I'm blowing out these candles, that I'm not going to be chemically dependent on this stuff. And and it wasn't just a wish. I really believed it every year. I think I remember thinking like I'm, 26. I mean, 26 is way too old to be doing this, and then like next year, 27 is, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's one thing when you're 19, but 20 and the next year, 28 is, and then what's really ironic is that like that next year, I actually stopped making that wish, kind of right before my 30th birthday. And then like that following year, I was not. Now I didn't stay sober. I was sort of forced into it. So it got to the point I was out there and I was, I was functioning. I was performing.
Yeah.
Like, I liked my job.
Obviously, you went through pharmacy school.
Yeah, I mean, I did it out there. I did like it, Like I said, I didn't get into it because I thought that this was going to happen. I really enjoyed it, and I had been in this point before. I had plenty of opportunities, where things were kind of coming up where I could have just, self-disclosed, and I did. Like at age 29, I basically like admitted to my employer what was going on, and they reported it to the board like immediately, which I didn't think that they were going to do. I was mandated to do 90 days inpatient treatment. So that's that stages of change thing I was saying, where it's like you can force somebody, right? It's like it's like when the like administrative courts or like judicial courts kind of get involved. Yeah, you're gonna either something terrible is gonna happen, or you're gonna go, or you're gonna go to treatment.
When I worked in the ER as an ER social worker, we could put people on holds too for psych, things like that.
Like 5250 kind of holds, or like 302. Yeah.
I don't remember the numbers, but yeah.
Yeah. Like I know every state. Every state has a different. But yeah, no, I'm familiar with that too. I guess you can think of it like that, right? It's like it wasn't technically a psychiatric hold. Like it didn't go in the books as a psychiatric hold, but it may as well have been. It was. Yeah. They were like, you got to go here for 90 days, and it was. I had never fully detoxed up to that point. There have been little times where I had to get myself like on and off Suboxone throughout the years, because I had access, but once in a while, like my manufacturers, like the stuff would be back ordered. Things did happen once in a while, and I would transition myself, but I never actually experienced withdrawal. And I was medicated for the first kind of couple of days, but then they offered me, some type of like long-standing kind of maintenance type of treatment, and I declined it. And that was the decision that I made kind of early, that was the route that I was going to go, and I knew that it was going to be painful. I didn't know how long it was going to last, and I talk about this a lot too with, because if you and I have known each other for a while, and you basically know what I'm all about more or less. And I'm kind of like a one-trick pony, I'm my story is, like the whole like reaction part even of like reaction recovery it is a reaction to what I see and hear is that, and this is not our fault, like us as like the recovery community, but a lot of times like when we're telling stories and sharing experiences, it really kind of comes across as, and I might even be doing this now, if I'm not careful, right? It comes across as I was in bad shape and I was really sick and desperate, and now I'm fully abstinent. I don't use any drugs, and my life is wonderful.
And here's the beautiful right? result of all of that hardship. Yeah,
exactly. And that is so not what it was. There's a couple phrases that I've coined. One is post-detox disillusionment, and I'll talk about that one in a second. But then the other is kind of getting so me being like a one-trick pony is I talk about this like desert time. Okay, so the desert time I say is not So when Moses is cast out and he's into the and he has been he and his people have been freed from bondage, right? But it still took them 40 years to get to the promised land. Okay, so like they're no longer in slavery, but they have to walk through this desert time. They have to do their desert time before getting to the promised land. And that's what I think about in terms of like early recovery for a lot of people.
Mm.
Certainly the people that gravitate towards me. This is
Yeah.
not everybody's experience, right? And I say that all the time. There are people that, they stop, like they're off alcohol or something for a week, and
Yeah.
they're, shouting to the mountaintops, and they're loving it, and and they're posting 30-day pictures, and my
Hmm.
skin looks better, my face looks
Yeah.
better, like, and all this kind of stuff. And
Wouldn't
I
that be
don't,
nice?
wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, I mean, maybe that is their experience. I usually cringe just a little bit, like when I see that, just like for their own sake, because I feel that they might be, setting themselves up potentially
Yeah.
for some trouble. But my thing is, you have to do this desert time, right?
Mm.
And we have to do that with other people. Now I got so I say that I've been in recovery since 2016. Like what I'm describing to you right now, where I'm getting court order, that was 2013.
Ah.
Okay, so there were years. I mean, the worst years of my life, hands down, not even no close second, came after I was introduced to recovery. I was introduced. I had actually been through all the steps. I had read all the books. I mean, we're kind of talking about, and that's a type of person too, right? The person that just that personality that wants to like win sobriety.
That is me. I am the former first chair, the eldest daughter. I like winning at things. I won at therapy last year, and it felt great.
Exactly. Yeah, you
now
won.
I'm back.
You got it.
Now I'm back in therapy. So.
Oh my God. So you had well, that's okay. You can win it again in 2022. You still have 8 more months. So.
Yeah. Give me 6 weeks, and he'll get me off his client roll soon. That's I relate
You'll be the
to that.
winner.
Yeah, I'll be the winner. But yeah, you're my book guy too. You're my go-to for like book recs and when I need some sort of topic, because I know you read them all.
And I still do that, and the difference though, like the difference is back then I was sort of reading it to win, essentially. I mean, I didn't think about it like this, but kind of looking back, just if I know all this stuff and I know the history, and I can, and what's funny is that like there's literally like no more annoying person. If you're hanging around like a lot of people that are in like early recovery, there's no more annoying person than the guy who has like 12 days and he's correcting somebody because they're misquoting history, and it's like but I was that guy, and that's probably why it bothers me so much, like to this day when I see it, because I'm probably feeling like what I was doing to other people back then. But I still do all that stuff. And my little caveat there, and I'll say this all the time, right? If you are that type who's kind of trying to figure this out, so to speak, right? That you're trying to figure it out, something happened to you and you don't like it necessarily, or at least not for a long time, and you want to find out why exactly this happened. You can do all your research and read all the books. I've read a book a week since getting sober, and I have them all in my house, and I have hundreds of books in I have a thing back here, if you can see it, like right next to my bed, that that has been my nighttime sedative, right? Every single night I read until basically the book falls out of my hand, and then that means it's time to turn off the light. You can do all that stuff, and it's fantastic, but you also have to keep taking all the other actions as if you're not also doing that, right? So it is not replacing any of the actual stuff. It is certain that kind of like the way that I'll talk about it is like is it like it has to be like entertainment, right? So it's not necessarily, don't think of it as part of the treatment. Like kind of somebody will say to me, oh, you're trying to do all this. I say no, you have to do something at 9:30 at night, right? Right? It's like some people are watching Netflix, which is fine. I'm in bed like reading a book, and that is what I choose to do between say 9:30 to whatever 10:30, whenever I go to sleep. So you can do all that stuff, and I have got books that I recommend to everybody in terms of I really feel that this will resonate with you, right? Because of course not everything is going to resonate with everybody. Also, some books I have found can be like or I will suggest with like little kind of like an asterisk, right? Where it's like, yeah, this is a good book, but so kind of trauma like related books tend to be this way, right? Where they're
Yeah.
Just a couple of days ago, I was talking to somebody about like the body keeps the score,
I
and somebody else was
asterisk
saying
that
like,
one every single time. I'm like, proceed with caution, but also great.
exactly, yeah, because if you're not ready for that,
Yeah.
and if you're sitting there with that, then what our brain tends to do at times is we start processing our own trauma as if we're a trauma therapist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're not, right? So like we're kind of working, it's almost like we're working with the book, processing through our own trauma, but we're not skilled enough to be able to navigate that.
And it's
So
bringing
then
it
the
all up
conclusion,
in the first place.
and it's bringing it up, and then we don't have the skills or the tools to be able to do something with it, and then it can sit there, and that's why that needs to be done in a more contained setting.
Well, and I'm curious if it's the same for you, but I had an immense amount in talking about reading all the books and knowing all the things. I had an immense amount of cognitive dissonance between what I knew clinically, because I have my master's in clinical therapy. Like, I know all the books about addiction. I went through 6 years of school studying psychology. I know about all of the things. And still it was showing up in my life in a way that did not match my book learning. So I think that there's this like unique kind of hell where you know the things, you've read the books, you've learned all of the information, and the lived experience that you're living through, the actual actions that are happening in your day-to-day life aren't matching up with that. And I think it speaks so much to the different parts of our brain that are at work and how we can have this intellectual desire, but we also have all these other pieces of our brain that are doing their own thing and running the show in different ways. And one of the things I wrote down from what you were talking about that really resonated with me was I believe the quote was, "I never thought it would be like this." And I think a lot of people are going to really resonate with this. Like, I never prescribed myself an alcohol problem. I never thought that I would become a young mother and suddenly be drinking 2 bottles of wine a night. I never thought, and I was really mad about it for a while too. I was really mad that this was my thing, that this was the bullshit that I had to deal with, that it didn't fit with who I was and the persona I had had my whole life. And I think that a lot of people are going to say like, yeah, I never thought it was going to be like that. So 2016, what was the 2015 or 2016, what was the turning point for you?
Yeah, so that preceding year was the first time that kind of physiologically things started catching up to me. Okay, so like things were going bad in terms of like career problems, relationship problems, friendships, so like all kinds of other things before that, but physically it didn't really start to unravel until then. And my kidneys were shutting down, my liver was shutting down. I wasn't able to process fluids correctly. I ended up gaining about 40 pounds over about like 3 weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and fluid. Like I wasn't really eating anything much differently. Like if I pressed down like on like my wrist, it would take a couple seconds edema to spring back up. That kind of pitting edema. Yeah. So I was not. It would take like 2 minutes to start, peeing. Just like all these like really weird things that had never happened before. That all started happening. So that was a big part of it. I was back here. My son was just born. Okay. I said that I'm since 2016, like my son is 6 years old. Right. So that kind of like lined up with him. I used to try to read him. We read these like Nancy Tillman books. Do you guys have any of those? Mm-mm. So I would sit with him at night as an infant, a couple months old, and reading. Like, I couldn't even make it through like this book without just breaking down. I felt so terrible that not like for the first time, it like wasn't even for me, right? I didn't even value like what was going on like, with myself at this point, because like there were some other things, and there was some like amphetamine induced psychosis. So I was deteriorating mentally as well, and I did not value like my own life at this point. But I would look at him and just think, man, there are 7.5 billion people on this planet. This guy got so unlucky to have gotten beamed into this house, right? And it's like what like an unfortunate turn of events for him. And, at that point, I had been through treatment. I'd been through 90 days of inpatient treatment. I did some outpatient, right? So I had been through that. And now again, I don't recommend this to everybody, but that was not going to be like my path.
Yeah.
I had this feeling that at that point I was either going to get sober or I wasn't. And it was such a strange experience. And I was 12 stepped into a group, around my area. We had recently moved there, so I didn't know anybody. This wasn't even in my exact neighborhood. This was, it was like 30 minutes away, and somebody would come and get me and bring me out there. And I detoxed in the back of this room, and it was in the winter. Oh, and it was so cold, and I was so sick, and I would just sit in the back, and like I wasn't working, at this point, and I would just wonder like what had happened, what I was making a ton of money managing like the largest pharmacies in Southern California a couple of years ago, and now this. And people ask me like what was different, and I struggled for a while to answer that question. I still struggle to answer it because it's hard to describe it. But when I'm pressed, I say the difference. Okay, so say between 2013 to 2016, the difference was I accepted that I was going to stay sober long before I accepted that I was ever going to feel better again. And that's the best way that I can describe it. Because what happened to me the first time, and I kind of, sort of like glazed over this, is it was my first time ever getting sober, right? So I knew that detox was horrible and the withdrawal was so painful. But I also knew that if I was somehow able to make it through that, and I got to 3 months sober or something, 3 months completely abstinent, right? So there's nothing in my system at all, then I was going to be good to go. And then my 16-year-old self would be back, and I would just be, I have learned my lesson, right? And that would be, and then I had a couple waves of depression that I had never ever experienced, like suicidal depression. And again, I don't know if that just wasn't ever there before that, like if it was actual depression because of the events of my life, or maybe I had some of these episodes before, but they were all being masked by drugs, right?
Right.
I have no way to know that. But I had this, and I was not able to cope with any of it. And I had relapse, and I wasn't in the pharmacy, right? So I didn't have access to my pills. I got into heroin, and then I got into like methamphetamine. So like that was that 2014 into 2015 year. But this time, it just, I accepted the fact that I was going to be sober, and I got sober for my son. Yeah. Absolutely. You'll hear once in a while people say, "Oh, you can't get sober for anybody." That is absolute bullshit, right? You have to stay sober for yourself. That's true. Okay. But you get sober? No, you get sober for whatever reason you get sober. Maybe it's to keep your kids, right? Maybe it's you got served divorce papers and you're trying to hang on to something. Maybe it's your boss just said, if I smell alcohol one more time, you're fired. Maybe like the doctor says, if you drink again, your liver is done, okay? Yeah. Permanently. This is not like the resilient type. We're talking you're finished. Maybe that's maybe that's the reason, right? But it's any one of these reasons can get the ball rolling. Now, unfortunately, like none of that stuff is going to sustain it, right? So like at some point that has to kind of shift over into something else. But that's what it was, and I did my desert time, man. That first year, and I've since gotten into kind of heavy into also like nutrition and dietary supplementation, and I see that, so like when I talk about that stuff, by the way, I talk about like recovery as a pie, right? And it's like that all of us, what percentage of the pie each of these things makes up is a little different for everybody. But let's just say like kind of like a fellowship and community is 50%, right? So for everybody, you got to do that. You got to feel safe with other people, and then you start filling in the other things, sense of purpose, different stuff. And like, let's just say like nutritional deficiencies, let's call it 10 to 12 to 15%, somewhere in that range. So, it is a relatively smaller slice of the pie. But if you're talking about, and then also for the sake of argument, let's just say that like you need to get to 75 to be able to maintain sobriety. Cause like if you're below 75, it's just too painful. if you're hovering around that 70 mark or 68 mark, 10% is going to be just enough to keep you over the
Yeah.
top, right? So that was one of the things that I did differently this time. But it was brutal. I mean, I didn't think I was ever going to feel motivated to do anything without drugs. I didn't think I was ever going to be able to, study something, pay attention without Adderall, watch TV without Oxys and Xanax, and sleep without any kind of anything, right? There was a very long period of time where I did not think that was possible.
Yeah.
And this is just going to be my life. And
I mean, I think,
thankfully that wasn't true.
I think it's really powerful what you said about like, you accepted that you were going to be sober regardless of the fact that it wasn't going to feel good for a while, for potentially a long time. And, I think a lot of people don't anticipate when they first do remove a substance from their life that just exactly the physiological impacts of that. And they go into it, especially in, as you said, this recovery world that we're in, where you see all these people with years and years of recovery talking about how glamorous their life is and how wonderful their life is, but you don't see day 1 or 20 or day 30 for them. And people go into this expecting things like the pink cloud. And when they don't have that experience, their bodies don't feel that way. That really puts them at risk for using again, for using drugs, for using alcohol. And I think it's really important and truly one of the things that we do here in this podcast and this storytelling is about the parts that are hard, because I think it's important to know about desert time. I think it's important to know about the period between the bottom, whether it's rock bottom, whether it's a quiet bottom or a soft bottom or a medium bottom, and the person you see now on Instagram with the splashy headshots. There's a lot of desert time in between there, and there's a lot of brutality in some ways, and just like a lot of, man, it's just really, really hard. And I think that's really powerful. But when you talk about reading your son bedtime stories and not knowing quite what it was, I hear again the models of change, the stages of change, going from like, I teach about it in a train metaphor. Like, you have a train and it's leaving a depot, and it's a one-way trip. It is never returning to that depot. You can never go back to the time before you departed that depot with this thought of, this isn't working for me. I can't keep doing this. Alcohol is not serving me, specifically since I work with alcohol. And you're always in some sort of forward motion. It might be really slow motion. It might have starts and stops. You might pop on a different track for a minute, but you can never go back to the depot before you ever had this idea in your brain. And when you talk about, I don't know what it was, I just see like the train just inching forward in some sort of way that was just enough to get it over that line from pre-contemplation into contemplation and action. And, I think it's really important, the space you hold in our community and the way you talk about this, because people do speak about this in a way that glamorizes it, and do speak about it in a way that makes it seem easy and I think there's a balance, right? Like, we want accessibility. We want people to be able to see themselves, but it also takes an immense amount of work. So when you talk about this pie chart and you talk about this percentage and this tipping point, one of the things you and I talked about before this podcast was a phrase you call recovery capital. And I'm wondering if that is part of that, or what recovery capital is, and what that actually, how we use something like the concept of recovery capital in our own life.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to kind of bookmark in my head just the topic of social media if we have time. I want to make a couple comments about that.
Yes.
Recovery capital. So even like what I do right now as a recovery coach, most of the folks that I work with, they are in that desert time. And that is, like that's typically when people are reaching out to me, right?
Yep.
So back when I was first starting, I would take on really like the majority of people, as long as it was physically safe. I would take on the majority. But at this point, so I always have 10 clients like at any kind of given time, and it has gotten to the point where I can be like a little bit more selective, right? So that I do want it to be the point where I believe through clinical intuition that I can actually help this person.
Mm-hmm.
So I am catching a lot of people in that desert time, right? So they are stable in terms of like it's not that they're drinking every day to the point that if they stop, they're going to seize, right?
DTs,
so they are right. They're physically stable, but they're not kind of emotionally grounded to the point that they want to be yet. And my thought that is kind of permeating each conversation is going to be on recovery capital. I define recovery capital as the internal and external resources needed to initiate and sustain recovery. Okay, so it's what is happening, and if we look, I mean, they have done all types of great research. Like William White, I'm not sure if you heard of William White, addiction researcher. He has done some unbelievable, probably the most of anybody that I'm aware of in terms of measuring, because they can objectively measure this like recovery capital, and then they can chart this individual's prognosis over time, right? So, and of all of the predicting variables, recovery capital, as I just defined it, that is number one. Okay, so that is the number one thing that is going to predict who is going to get to that point of like what I call sustainable recovery. Sustainable remission, to the point where, and I'm defining that as the point where you and your family can sustain your recovery without external help. Okay. You don't need outpatient anymore. You don't need, you're out in the world, you're doing your thing and you're stable. That you're not just going to be injecting heroin tonight. Like if I'm not looking at you, right? You're not doing that. You are stable. The recovery capital, and this could be anything, right? So we talk about one of the things that I'm kind of very big into right now, and one of these, there's an organization that I'm working at right now that is getting recovery coaching into OTP sites, opioid treatment providers, kind of formerly like methadone clinic, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of what types of like recovery capital do we need as a recovery coach? So as a recovery specialist, right? Each state will have maybe certified recovery specialists. What does that person need to do to help this individual at this moment achieve long-term sustained recovery? And it's hard. I mean, you think about the things that our society has kind of set up that actively remove recovery capital. Okay. You got a possession charge 3 years ago and you have a felony on your record. Part of recovery capital is the ability to get and maintain a job and to make money, right? If you don't, we can say money's not important. It's just right up there with oxygen. Okay. If you don't give this person the ability to sustain themselves financially, the risk that they were going to devolve back into, so when you start putting stuff in their way, or they can't get affordable housing because of X, Y, and Z has happened. And this is all, so that is the external recovery capital that we're talking about, right? That is things that it is like, that has to be addressed right off the bat. So if you're working with somebody, there's sort of like a kind of like a pyramid almost that I'm using,
Maslow's.
where kind of like that. You can sort of think of it like that. Yeah, exactly. Where if you're not meeting the capital that they need to achieve housing, okay, if you want to talk about like Maslow's, food, water, shelter. Like, I'm not going to go all the way to the top of what's the top, like self-actualization.
Self-actualization. We'll get to that like 10 years from now. Yeah.
I don't know how I'm going to afford my grocery bill. Self-actualization, right? So it is walking with these people kind of up this pyramid, so to speak, and trying to build out the foundation. And it's not doing it for anybody, right? It is exactly what this person, it is kind of supporting and then holding them accountable to build these tiny little habits, so that we set goals, just in your classic SMART goals. We set goals and then we follow that on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And then as that stuff starts to, like materialize, okay, now we can look at the next thing. Now we can look at the next thing. And it is amazing what can happen in a relatively short period of time.
I hear the biopsychosocial model in that. Like
there's a lot of that in there.
And I think that that's a really interesting shift we're starting to take in the recovery field in general, like realizing that to be sober, it can't be a singular event. It can't be a singular strategy. It really requires looking at the external, the internal, our stress levels, our like you said, ability to get a job and have financial security. And if people are listening and they're one of my clients, we talk about the body battery a lot in our physical,
Mm,
mental, and emotional capacity. If you don't have any capacity, it makes it 1,000 times harder. So sometimes I'm talking about laundry and how we streamline like
yeah.
kid drop off or whatever it looks like
Yeah.
for
Childcare,
somebody's,
big one.
yeah, for somebody's actual capacity to be open enough to be able to make this change in a sustainable way rather than a quick fix or something that works for now and then goes off the rail down the road. So I think that that's a really interesting theory, and it's cool that you're bringing it into places. So I know you do a lot of volunteering right now. What kind of work are you doing in the space in addition to your recovery coaching?
Yeah, so I'm working with a company right now where we're essentially trying to bring recovery coaching on a more scalable level to
Mhm.
a larger group of people, right? We're calling it the recovery coaching, but it's that peer recovery specialist.
Yeah.
So those peer recovery specialists that like you might see, in like an ER
Yeah.
setting, even like an inpatient outpatient setting at times. Some places are kind of getting more like more insurance carriers are
Mhm.
now covering that service. So how can we move that virtually in a similar manner to what we do with telehealth,
Yeah.
therapy
Right.
kinds of things, sort of like the same kind of model, but we're looking at it more that kind of peer specialist. How might that look?
Opening
Um,
access.
Opening access exactly to that long term, right? It's like
Mhm.
I talk about this all the time. We as a society, we as the people that are trying to help in this uh, epidemic, we are doing a good job at 30, 60, 90 days.
Mm.
That we have done a very good job of getting more people have access to recovery. It's not perfect, of course, but more people have access than have ever had access at any time in human history. More people are getting off this stuff. Like we know about the overdoses, right? Because
Yeah.
because that's sort of making the numbers. But again, that is just poisonings. That is fentanyl poisonings. That's not
Mm.
necessarily. We are actually prescribing less opioids. Less and less people are becoming chemically dependent on opioids. I'm sticking with that one, for example. Of course, with alcohol, even over the pandemic, that
Yeah.
spiked. We'll see how those numbers shake out like this year.
Right.
That'll be telling. So we've done a good job, but we have done a terrible job at that maybe 90-day to 5-year mark,
Mm.
right? Kind of like where you fall off,
Yeah.
and
Which can still be desert days.
yeah, which is like
Yeah.
there's a lot of desert days that are sort of mixed into there. One of the one of the pieces that so it's not financially plausible to have somebody in an inpatient setting for 5 years, of course, right? So it's like, of course, the insurance is going to only pay for that for a short period of time. And I'm not blaming the insurance
Yeah.
carriers like in any of this kind of stuff, although they're the ones who were offering treatment for a couple of
Yeah.
months and
Yeah.
then we sort of stop. But there are other services like
Hmm.
like recovery coaching in that capacity. Okay, so that's a little bit different than the private stuff that I do or that you do. So this is that kind of peer
Yeah.
recovery specialist role, but that is a role that can then stay with that person
Mm.
more long term, right? So
Mhm.
like we don't just say when you finish IOP, okay, we're going to have a graduation ceremony. Here's your treatment center coin. You finish, great job. Go make a meeting, get your hand up, say you're an alcoholic,
Yeah.
get a sponsor, work the steps, and live a good life. Now that, and I'm not putting that down, by the way. So I hope
Right.
that it doesn't sound like that. That
It
alone,
doesn't though. I think I hear what you're saying, that there needs to be more options than just that.
right? Yeah, like that will work for a percentage of people,
Yeah.
right? So it's like that worked for me. I just told you my story. Right?
Mhm.
Okay, so that actually worked. Now, but that is not. We cannot just say that if that does not work for you, well, you just you weren't willing enough. You
Yeah.
haven't hit bottom yet.
Right.
You're not in like enough pain. There's somebody that I heard somebody telling a story where it was like an H&I panel, like hospitals and institutions panel came into I think it was a jail setting. It's very like low income, kind of rough area, and there was a group of maybe like AAers or something came in, like, and they started talking to these guys, about, well, say like when it gets bad enough, you'll get sober,
Mm,
and you're just not in like enough pain. And then the
mm,
case manager, I think it was like the nursing case manager, actually went up to these guys afterwards, and they're like, thank you, of course, for your time here, and for volunteering, but you don't understand that,
yeah.
my patients don't hit bottom, they live on the bottom.
Right.
Okay, it's not
Maslow's
an absence
again.
of pain; it's an absence of hope.
Yeah.
You know, they don't need this psychological change. They need a systems change,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing has always sort of stayed with me. And I said, yeah. So that is something that I've been very aware of always.
Mm,
That my story is my story, right? And it's valuable to the extent that it's my personal experience. Um, but I cannot just force that on somebody else and
mm,
say, if you're serious, you'll do everything, do
yep.
exactly like I did, and like you'll get everything exactly like I want. That's absurd. I mean, you have a
Right.
whole different life than I do.
Right.
You've had a whole different experiences before that. You have your family situation is different. Your relationship with your parents is different. Your income is different. The safety of your community is different.
Mm,
Your physical health is different. You have other mental health issues that I don't have. And
yeah.
it is so absurd to suggest that because we both did heroin in the past, that
Hmm.
I can just say that I know exactly
Yeah. Here's how you do
what
it.
you need.
Yeah.
I mean, that is, I can't think of anything more narcissistic. Really, I really
Well,
can't.
yeah, it's out
Right?
there.
This is
It's
this is this has been the most treatment like resistant, like disorder,
mm,
like, of all time, right?
yeah.
And I'll make this analogy a lot. It is anything else that takes us by storm and that reaches like epidemic status. Okay, so I use like the HIV/AIDS epidemic of the '80s. So kind of anything that sort of comes on and it's just like wreaking havoc, and then we
Relentless.
start putting all these dollars into it, all these research dollars, and uh, if you fast forward 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we're doing way better always.
Mm,
It's like when tuberculosis first came out, it's like 20 years later, we're doing better. When
yeah.
any kind of, like infectious disease, any type of thing that surprised us, COVID, right? Any
Yeah.
sort of thing. And then if you fast forward like a period of time, we're doing better.
Hmm.
This is one of the only ones where we're actually doing worse,
Mm,
right? So this is so complicated. It's so much like there's a lot of great science, and I love reading it. But to think that we have this thing figured out to the point
yeah.
that I can confidently say that this is exactly what you need to do. I mean, it's just I can't think of anything more arrogant than that.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's very self-aware to know. And I think that we could talk about the coaching industry a lot, but there's a lot of the like
Yeah,
this lived experience worked, so this is what I'm going to teach you. And I think that, obviously that's missing a lot of people and leaving a lot of gaps. Well, Jeff, the last question I ask on every episode of Sober Stories is if your story were to be written in a book, and when I say your story, I mean your story before and also your story now, but also maybe your philosophy as well, was to be written into a book, what would it be titled?
oh God, I, I should have a good answer because I think about
Hmm.
writing a book. And the title does change in my head once in a while. It would be something like along the lines of maybe like my name, maybe just even Jeff Simone colon a pharmacist journey into and out of hell,
Mm,
something along
yeah.
those lines, because that is the way that I envision what I experienced.
Mm,
I see it as hell. I don't I necessarily believe hell is somewhere else, right? Somewhere below me. I think it's absolutely a place that we can get to here,
hmm. Yeah.
and I was there, and I'm not there today.
Not there today. Well, you and I could talk for hours about this because I
Mhm.
also love the theory and all of the book learning that you have. And like I said earlier, you're my book guy. I think I just emailed you like this weekend asking for a book
I'm
recommendation.
always here for that. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So I could talk to you about this for hours and hours, but I want to make sure that we are able to give our listeners access to you. So, how can they connect with you? How can they find you? What do you have going on in your world? How can people find Jeff to connect with?
Yeah. So I'm on. I have accounts set up on pretty much all of the social media platforms, but I try not to spread myself too thin. I'm pretty active on Instagram. That is, I'm more active there than any of the other ones. I enjoy Instagram. I enjoy that community, so I tend to spend my time there. Anybody, most people know that if they want direct and easy access to me, message me on Instagram. That it's never going to be more than a couple of days before I'm getting back to anybody ever. It's usually less than that. So yeah, I would say Instagram first at Reaction Recovery, all one word is my handle. I have a lot of YouTube videos that I've uploaded, long form podcasts. You can search, Surviving Opioids is a podcast that finished season 1 over the fall. It's about 20-25 episodes. It's everywhere podcasts, Apple, iTunes, and Audible, and Spotify, and all that. My website is www.reactionrecovery.com. I kind of spell out some of my, like my other thoughts. I'm just kind of get to me any one of those methods, and I'll respond.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Jeff, and your story and your candor. And I think that so many people are going to really resonate with this idea of desert days. I know it's really stuck out to me too. Like I wrote it in big capital letters on my notepad, but I really appreciate your time and your energy and the story that you have lent to us today.
Well, thank you very much for asking me, Beth. It's been a pleasure.